We are learning Le'iloi Nishmas Mindel, Mariam Bas Kalman Ruven, her Neshama Shavin Aliyah, and tonight we're also learning for all of Achinu Kol Beis Yisrael, everyone in the land of Israel who right now is under attack. We hope it's over, but we are certainly having them in mind. Okay, so we've been in the middle of a middle of the Gemara, that a Mishnah that was just telling us that there's machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Kiva about using a piece of cloth as a wick, and Rabbi Eliezer said that this wick, that is a wrapped up garment, is going to be tameh. Rabbi Kiva said that such a wick is going to be tahar. In other words, it's not susceptible to tuma. And the question is, what was this machlokas revolving around? We saw one opinion earlier, and today we're going to see another opinion and trying to understand why one said tameh and one said tahar. And we're going to make an ukimta. We're going to assume that it's talking about a very particular case. So let's see. Rav Nuna Amar, hacha b'pachos mishlosha shlosha skin. We're talking about a case where they are dealing with a piece of cloth that is less than 3 hand breadths. So what is, again, this is 1 hand breadth, 2 hand breaths, 3 hand breaths by 3, 1, 2, 3. So basically something about this size, okay? And we're talking about a case where a person uses this piece of cloth for a very insignificant purpose. Now let's pause for a second. When a person has a piece of cloth, that cloth is mekabel tumah. It's something which is susceptible to tumah. When I use it for something insignificant, it no longer is a beged, and therefore it is not mekabel tumah. But now we're going to talk about a case where, as we're going to see, after a person uses it for this insignificant purpose, they're then going to go and set it aside. And by setting it aside, the question is that action of setting it aside, and there are different types of setting asides, as we'll see, you'll see what I mean, does that bring it back to its original status as being a beged, and therefore susceptible to tumah? That's the question on the table, okay? So let's see. It's not. Okay, so Eliezer and Rabbi Kiva both go according to their reasoning that they say elsewhere. It goes like this. Instead, we have a Mishnah that said, Pachos mishlosha shlosha sheskin of kokobo as a merchatz. A person has a rag, a piece of clothing, which is less than 3 by 3 hand breadths, that a person uses it to plug the pipes of a bathhouse. Okay, a very, lowly type of activity. Or it's hot to stir a pot, and therefore they take this piece of clothing and they use it as a way of holding the spoon, okay? Or to clean a millstone. Again, all very, basically turning a piece of clothing into a rag. When the person then goes ahead and they put it away in a way that it's storing it in a way that it's prepared for future use, or it's put away for storage that's not for future use, we'll see what that means soon, tameh. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says that this rag is tameh. What does that mean? That means it was a beged, it was a cloth which was susceptible to tumah. It was then used for these purposes which took it away from its susceptibility to tumah because it's no longer a beged, and then by storing it, becomes tameh again. Rabbi Shua disagrees, and he says no. He says that tahar. He says whether a person put it back for storage in a way that it's prepared for use, whether you put it in storage where it's not prepared for use. Again, we haven't defined what those exact terms mean, but bottom line is you put it away for storage, tahar, it maintains its status as being a rag and not a beged, and therefore it is not susceptible to tumah. Rabbi Kiva, as we're going to see, takes a middle of the ground approach. Rabbi Kiva Omer, mina muchan tameh. If the person used it as put it away in a way that it's prepared for use, it's going to be tameh, it's susceptible to tumah. Okay? The shalom and muchan tahar. But if it was put away in a way that it's unprepared for future use, it is tahar. Okay, now Ula is going to come and explain this machlokes a little bit more for us. Okay, different opinion about who said the following. Everyone agrees. If the person goes ahead and puts this rag after using it to clean the millstone or all those different things and throws it in the garbage, everyone agrees that you're done. You're finished using that kli, and therefore it becomes completely tahar. If a person puts it in a box is the equivalent of an ancient drawer or shelf. That's where you store things you're going to use in the future. For sure, to be called tameh. It goes back, it reverts back to its original status. In other words, no one was ever arguing about whether or not it could go back to its original status or not. What they are arguing about is the following: They're arguing about a case where a person goes and puts it on a hook or a peg, or place it behind the door. That's somewhere in that continuum. In other words, on the one hand, you have putting the garbage. Certainly, you don't plan on using it again. Even if you then go ahead and use it again, it's basically still a rag. There's putting it back in a box. That's for sure. You plan on using it again. It goes back to becoming a beged. Hanging it, on a peg or placing behind the door is in the middle of that continuum, and therefore that's where you have machlokas. Rabbi Eliezer savar midolov uzrako ba'ashba daite ilavai. Because the fact that a person did not put in the garbage, that means I care about it, and therefore it does revert back to becoming a beged, and it becomes tameh. Okay, ask the Gemara, "V'mai karle shalom menamuchan." So why did Rabbi Eliezer say whether I stored it for usage or the prepared, whether I stored it in a way that's prepared for use or prepared shalom menamuchan, not to be used, implying that it's not going to be used again. Rabbi Eliezer's whole svara, the whole reasoning behind this thing is saying that by putting it behind the door, putting it on the peg, it is as if it's prepared for use in the future. So he says it's a relative term. In relation to placing in a box, it's considered lo min hamuchan, not prepared. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer is saying whether I put it in a box, which is certainly prepared for use, or min ha lo min hamuchan, or not prepared for use, meaning really I am going to use it, but it's in a way that it's not so prepared for use, i.e. putting it behind the door, putting on a peg. In both those cases, it's still going to be tamei. Rabbi Yeshua says no. If I put it in a box, great. But anything less than a box, it's not prepared. Ask the Gemara, V'amai karle muchan. So why did Rabbi Yeshua say whether it's lo min hamuchan, okay, not prepared for future use, or min hamuchan, or even prepared for future use, it's going to be tahar? You're telling me the whole point is that when I put it on a peg or put it behind the door, it's not min hamuchan, it's not prepared for use. So he says the same answer, like ashba muchanu. In relationship to the garbage, it's more muchan. In other words, he's saying like this: if I put in the garbage, of course, it's going to be tahar because I plan on throwing it out. But even if I then go ahead and put it in something which, in relationship to the garbage, is more prepared, i.e. behind the door on a peg, it's going to be considered, it's still going to be not, so again, he's going to call that prepared, even though I don't plan on using it again, but in the context of compared to the garbage, it is more prepared for usage in the future. Still, he says it's not enough to revert it back to becoming a full-fledged beged, and therefore he says it's not susceptible to tuma, and therefore it is tahar. Rabbi Kiva, bitzlo b'magod, savar Rabbi Eliezer, b'nicha achor yadel, savar Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Kiva does something interesting. He says, when I hang it on a peg, then that seems like, I'm hanging on a peg, that means I plan on using it again, and therefore he says, in that case, he agrees to Rabbi Eliezer, it's going to be tamei. When he puts it behind the door, never going to see it again. The door is going to remain open, it's going to be behind the door, and therefore in that case, he agrees to Rabbi Yeshua and he holds it is tahar. Then the Gemara says, well, how did Rabbi Kiva legabei Rabbi Yeshua? Now, and here we come back to our Mishnah. Rabbi Kiva then apparently went back, he retracted his opinion and went and ruled like Rabbi Yeshua in both cases. In both the case of the peg and the case behind the door, he holds in both those cases it is tahar. And as we're going to see, that's what our Mishnah is talking about. Mimai, the Gemara says, how do we know this? Rava says, Miktanim psilas habeged. My area to time psilas beged, listening psilas shel beged, my psilas ha beged. So the Gemara says like this: our Mishnah said if there is a psilas ha beged, a wick made of garment, what it could have or should have said is psilas shel beged, a wick made from garment material. Instead, it says a wick made of a garment. Why does it say, implying that it still has some element, some usage as a garment? In other words, has some usage. And what's that referring to? What that's referring to, Dadaim Begedu, it's referring to something which is in some way still a form of clothing. What is that? That's a case where a person goes ahead and places the rag behind the door. That's the case where the person goes ahead and, the person goes ahead and places it on a peg. That in that case, where it's still, at least one could argue, it's still much more of a piece of clothing. Nonetheless, Rabbi Kiva said, even in that case, it is going to be tahar, meaning he retracted from his view that was stated in the earlier Mishnah, and here he says both in the case where I put it behind the door, or in the case where I go ahead and I put it on a peg. In both those cases, he holds like Rabbi Yeshua and holds that that piece of clothing is tahar, and that's the case, that's the psilas habeged kiplo v'yivhava. He's talking about the case where he rolled that and made that into a wick. In that case, it is still going to be tahar. Why? Because we're talking about a piece of cloth which was used for one of these purposes, and then I went ahead and used it for a wick, and that is the case that Rabbi Eliezer says tamei, and Rabbi Kiva says tahar. Okay, so again we had two explanations behind why Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Eliezer argue about why you cannot use it as a wick for Shabbos, and two explanations behind why Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Eliezer argue as to whether or not this piece of cloth is tamei or tahar. And now we are going to move on to another Mishnah. Person, now let's pause before we see the Mishnah. There is a halacha that a person is not allowed to extinguish something on Shabbos. Okay, you can't extinguish a fire on Shabbos. That is well known. That's straightforward. In addition to that, there is a gezerah. There is a concern that a person in addition to that, and this is the way the Rush is going to understand our Mishnah, that a person is not only not allowed to blow out a candle on Shabbos, but also if you have a candle, which is a lamp, which is filled with oil, you can't scoop some of the oil out. Even though you're not affecting the lamp directly, you're not affecting the flame, still you're not allowed to do that because it is a form of extinguishing. That is the way the Rush understands this. Okay, so therefore the Gemara, the Mishnah is going to tell us as follows: a person can't make a hole in an eggshell, and fill it with oil, and place it next over the mouth of a lamp, and the oil is going to drop into the cup. Okay, so you have a cup and you have an egg over here, and it's dripping oil into this cup. Okay, they're not attached, but it's dripping oil. It's one above the other, and it's dripping oil into it. So you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to have a candle like that for Shabbos. Even if this this thing holding on to the oil is made out of earthenware. We'll come back to why that's significant. Rabbi Yehuda matter. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's fine, no problem. Okay. If a potter, if a professional goes ahead and attaches the egg to the lamp or the thing of earthenware to the lamp, then it is going to be allowed because there's one utensil. Now, what's going on over here? What's going on over here is as follows. The rabbis were concerned that since we're not allowed to take oil out of a lamp, there's a concern that if I have a collection of oil that is ultimately fueling a flame, but it's not part of a lamp, it's separate from it, there's a concern that I'm not going to be putting pieces together in my head, and I'm going to just absentmindedly go ahead and take some oil from that cup that's pouring oil into my lamp. Why? Because I don't see it as part of the lamp. If it's one lamp, of course I'm not going to do that. Or we're not concerned I'm going to do it. If it's separate, the rabbis were concerned, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And therefore they said, in this case where I have this egg which is dripping oil, they're afraid that I'm going to go ahead and take oil, and therefore I'm not allowed to use such a lamp for Shabbos, because the concern that I might go ahead and take some oil from that lamp. Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned about this. Okay, we'll come back to why earthenware is they have to mention earthenware. Okay, then further, a person is not allowed to fill a bowl with oil, and place it next to a lamp. Again, a person not allowed to fill a bowl with oil and place it next to a lamp. So here you have two bowls basically. One of them is filled with oil. One of them has the candle itself. And you place the ends of the wick in this bowl, goes into the next bowl, and that's where the wick comes out with a little fire over here, right? So two bowls side by side, next to each other, wick is drawing oil from this one, bringing it into this one, and then you have a fire there. Rabbi Yehuda says this is not a problem, okay? Utzricha, all these cases are basically the same idea that you have a separate utensil. The Chachamim are concerned, I'm going to take oil out of that utensil, and that's why I can't use it on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned. So the Gemara wants to know, why do I need three cases? I just had one case. I would have learned it's the same principle over and over again. Tzricha, no, you need them all. Why? The Ishminish for Fershal Beitzah. If I just talk the eggshell case, in that case, the rabbi said that it is not allowed. An eggshell doesn't impact the oil negatively, right? You put the oil in the eggshell, you're going to scoop it up, okay? But if the oil was an earthenware container, earthenware ruins oil. You might have thought the rabbis were lenient there, because there where you have, if instead of an eggshell you had earthenware, which had a hole in the bottom, then you'd say, okay, so it has oil in an earthenware, and the oil is ruined, so we're not concerned the person going to take it out. Nonetheless, that's why we had to teach that case. Teachers, the rabbi still said it's going to be usher. I'm still concerned. So, Amud Rabbi Yehuda, I would have thought maybe they agreed to Rabbi Yehuda that it's permitted there. Nonetheless, so that's why the teachers say they don't agree. And had we just learned the case of earthenware, Rabbi Yehuda, only in that case, Rabbi Yehuda say that it is allowed. In the case of the eggshell, maybe he agrees to the rabbis. Nonetheless, so that's where I teach both cases. Teach us that they argue in both those cases. Okay? Had you just had the first two cases of the Mishnah, the case of the egg and the case of the earthenware, there you would have said, since they're ultimately attached, not attached well, but they're attached, you would have thought, that's why he says, I see them as one entity, I'm not afraid I'm going to scoop it out. But if you have a bowl next to the lamp, it's two separate things. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda would agree to the rabbis in that case. Fine, and that's why I have to teach that case. And had we only taught that case of the bowl, there the rabbis were concerned it's two separate things. But in the case where it's one entity, it's attached, even though it's not attached well, maybe they agreed to Rabbi Yehuda and they allow it. Tzricha, that's when we need all the case teachers. In all these three scenarios, they argue. Okay? Now we go on to analyze the next words in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, if the potter attached them, made them all as one, it's permitted. Okay? And now the Gemara is going to bring a contradiction. Tana, we had a brayso which said a little bit differently. If a person goes ahead and attaches the eggshell or the earthenware with plaster or clay, it's allowed. Not on Yotzir time, but our Mishnah said it has to be done by a professional. Which one is it? Does it have to be done by a professional, or could it be done by anyone? So Gemara says no. My Yotzir, when our Mishnah said it has to be done by potter, ke'ein Yotzir, means like a potter. Meaning, it doesn't mean it has to be done by a professional, it has to be done professionally. That's what it means. Okay, fine. Tanya. Bryce, a couple of stories. Okay, and this first story is the one that's going to be most relevant to us. It's going to show where Rabbi Yehuda learned his halach. Again, Rabbi Yehuda was the one who said that this drip eggshell, is allowed to be used on Shabbos. Where does he get it from? Rabbi Yehuda. Pam acha shebaseinu b'aliyas beis Natzah b'Lod. We were in the attic of Nitzah's house in Lod. Ve'viu lanu shvafer shel beitza. And they brought on Erev Shabbos a eggshell type of thing, right? Eggshell attached to a lamp and dripping oil into it. We filled it with oil. We made a hole in it, and we placed it over the lamp. And the elders were there. All the big guns were there. V'lo amru lanu davar, and they didn't say anything. Amr lo, so clearly it's allowed, right? This Rabbi Yehuda gets a source, says, look, the rabbi saw us do this, and they didn't say anything. Amr lo misham raya. From there's a proof. Shani, so the Gemara says that's not a proof. Shani beis nitzah, there's reason hain. The people in that household are very careful about mitzvos, and therefore the gezerah, the concern the rabbis had, didn't apply over there. That's a very strange thing to say. Normally we don't say, there are many things which are gezerahs, which are decrees, and we don't say, if they're very stringent and very scrupulous with halacha, we don't have to worry about them keeping this, they don't have to keep the stringency. In other words, muktzah is a gezerah of sorts. Muktzah, the notion we're not allowed to move certain items is a decree. Ultimately, so when we say, if I'm in a house of someone who's very careful, I don't have to worry about muktzah, that makes no sense. So one of the commentators explained that the reason that the answer is as follows. The answer is that since it must be that we're talking about the early stages of this decree. In other words, there are stages and decrees. There's an initial stage, and then we see, are people picking up, people not picking up, and then after a while, if it really becomes universal, then no one's allowed to go against it. But in the early stages, it doesn't necessarily have the same weight. So in this early stage, this decree existed, but in that particular scenario, because it was a place where people were very strict about halacha, therefore it wouldn't necessarily apply. But nowadays, you can't say, we're very strict about halacha, therefore we don't have to do those decrees. Nothing doing. Okay? Bottom line is, Rabbi Yehuda learned his halacha from there. The rabbi said to him, Rabbi Yehuda, you missed the boat. Maybe it was a unique scenario, that's why they allowed it, but really it still would be usher. Okay, now we're going to have kind of a similar type of story, a related story really. Avin Tzipora, a man by the name of Avin of Tzipori. Okay, Garar Safsala bi Lisa de Shesha. He dragged a bench on a marble floor. Okay, there is nothing halachically wrong with dragging a bench on a marble floor. However, there is a machlokes about whether or not you're allowed to drag a bench on a floor of earth. Why? Because you might go ahead and make a groove in the ground, and that's a form of plowing. And there is machlokes, even though it's not your intent, it's called davar she'eino miskaven. I'm not intending to do so. This bench is over here, and I want to move it over here, so I'm dragging it. I don't intend to make a groove, but it's happening, right? So is it davar she'eino miskaven mutter asr? Is it allowed, not allowed? And that is a debate. Okay, so this person dragging a bench on marble. Now you're not making any grooves in marble, not happening. Okay, Le'elam Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar was in the presence of Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar. Amar Le, who saw this happening, he said it like this: Ish tokilach kidishtiku lechaver Rabbi Yehuda. If I'm not going to say anything, just like my colleagues didn't say anything, Rabbi Tarfon and the others didn't say anything in front of Rabbi Yehuda and his eggshell, then nafik minei chorba. There's going to be a terrible destruction coming out. What is he referring to? Terrible destruction? It means that people are going to learn the wrong halacha. They're going to say, look, just like you're allowed to drag on marble, you're going to drag also on the ground, and he is of the opinion you're allowed to drag on the ground. So Gzera, so he said Gzera, Lisa the Shesha, Atu Lisa the Alma. He was afraid, therefore he spoke up. He said, don't do it. He was afraid that people are going to see him being okay doing it on a marble ground, and therefore they're going to say, you're also allowed to do it on an earthenware ground, and he would not want that to happen, so he made them stop dragging the bench. Okay, another story about dragging a bench on Shabbos. Reish Kanishta de Vatra. This person who worked in the shul, he was the main person, he was like the gabbai of the shul. He was dragging a bench on unpaved surface. Here it's surface. Here it's really the machlokes, where it's really problematic. And Rav Yirmiyah Rabbah was there. Okay, Amalei Rav Yirmiyah Rabbah said to him, come on, why are you allowed to drag the bench? Who do you hold like? Rabbi Shimon? Like Rabbi Shimon who holds davar she'eino miskaven is mutter, something that you don't intend to do is allowed? He says, Rav Shimon doesn't say this in this case. Why? Amar dam Rav Shimon ben Bigdolin to lo efshar. Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbah says Rav Shimon only allowed this davar she'eino miskaven of dragging a bench is only in a scenario where it's by a very large object, where it's impossible to carry. You're one person. How do I carry this big bench? I'm allowed to drag it because it's davar she'eino miskaven. A big tanami amar, but it's something small that's easy to carry. He wouldn't allow you to, so to speak, play with fire and drag it where you might have this groove. He's not going to go so far. He's only going to allow it in a scenario where you're really, truly stuck. And therefore, he was telling this gabbai, this bench which you're carrying is not such a heavy bench. Pick it up. Even Rav Shimon, who is mekel, who says that davar she'eino miskaven is mutter, that's only in a scenario where you're really stuck. But we're not really stuck. You should rely on this. Okay? Upliga de Ula. However, this Rav Yirmiyah Abba disagrees with Ula because Ula told us machlokes biktanim. Ula says the argument is by small ones. Ula says that Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Shimon argue about whether or not you're allowed to drag small ones. Rav Shimon says you are. Rabbi Yehuda says you're not. Aval b'gdolim t'vir called mutter. By big ones, everyone agrees you're allowed, right? So Ula would have told this gabbai, you're doing the right thing. If you hold like Rav Shimon, you're allowed to drag it because it's a small, even though it's a small bench. By big one, if it was a big one, he would say for sure you're doing the right thing because even Rabbi Yehuda agrees. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Even though we are in the middle of a Gemara, but we're going to stop over here because we stopped over here in the live share today, and we'll pick up, God willing, tomorrow. Have a great day.